Hi, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. I am Matthew Silverman, the director of the Haberman Institute for Jewish Studies, and I'm honored to welcome Judy Klitsner to our community. I look forward to this session as we explore the biblical theme of sibling discord and how we can uncover signs for hope and healing and repair. I would like to extend a special welcome to those of you who are new to the Haberman Institute. Our mission is to provide high-quality, in-depth encounters with Jewish thought, history, and culture. We invite you to learn more about the Haberman Institute programs and classes by visiting our website, habermaninstitute.org. I want to highlight one program that may be of interest to you. Next week, I believe in June, Rabbi Joseph Skloot, a professor at Hebrew Union College, will be presenting on the history of Jewish texts, from the oral traditions to the written texts to the digital versions that we have today. I'm interested to learn how this evolution of textual mediums has affected and continues to affect our tradition. And now on to this evening, or this afternoon or evening, I guess, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you to Andrew R. Ammerman for sponsoring our Spring 2024 lecture series. He dedicates the semester's learning in loving memory of Josephine and H. Max Ammerman, Stephen C. Ammerman, and Avi West. As usual, ask questions using the Q&A button on your Zoom screen. Please be as concise as possible and use complete sentences. Questions will be discussed at the end of the lecture, but feel free to write them in at any time during the presentation. There's also going to be a couple of opportunities for feedback using the Q&A button. So when those come up, go ahead and you can type in response to the session. There'll be a few opportunities there. Okay. And now I'd like to welcome Judy Klitsner. She is the senior lecturer at the Pardes Institute of Jewish Studies in Jerusalem, where she holds the Rabbi Joshua S. Bakst Chair in Tanakh. A disciple of the great Torah teacher Nechama Leibowitz, Judy is a popular international lecturer addressing audiences that span the denominational spectrum. She has served as a regular visiting lecturer at the London School of Jewish Studies and has taught Bible to Christian and Muslim audiences. Judy is the author of Subversive Sequels in the Bible, How Biblical Stories Mine and Undermine Each Other, which received the National Jewish Book Award. She is the founding board chair of Sacred Spaces, an organization that works to systematically address abuse in Jewish institutions. She has just completed a pilot for an ambitious joint Pardes Sefaria project, an original line-by-line commentary to the Chumash. And I now welcome Judy to join us this evening.
This is my first encounter with the wonderful Haberman Institute, and I think I found out all I need to know when I read that it is for lovers of learning. I think we're going to be fast friends. Okay, I live in the city of Jerusalem and here in Israel, and I'm sure in various ways, wherever all of you are out there, everything changed for us on October 7th. And it's sometimes, because it's so overwhelming and so all-consuming, it's sometimes hard to think about where we were as a people before that on October 6th. If we rewind to just before that horrific day, what we would find is a Jewish people that was deeply divided within itself. There was just a barrage of loud, aggressive infighting, political and religious differences. That was going on within Israel. It was going on within Jewish communities throughout the world, and it was certainly going on between the Israeli Jewish community and Jewish communities elsewhere. And in fact, many believe that our infighting played a role in our vulnerability as a people on that day. And our enemies noted this with glee and realized that it was a very opportune time to strike. And just to give you a sense, here's how our great enemy to the north of us, the leader of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, here's a quote from him not long before October 7th, where he said, "For the first time, we are hearing from the Zionist entity a fear of civil war, bloodshed, and nearing the point of explosion. When they speak of the collapse of the Zionist entity, they are talking about a limit of 80 years. The state will not survive more than that." Basically, what he was saying was, we could just sit back and let these people destroy themselves. And then Hamas got the idea, well, perhaps this is a good time because they're so weak for this strike to take place. And more evidence to that effect has been coming out. And even now, after living through the unspeakably brutal attacks of that infamous day, we know that our internal divisions are even more threatening to us than any physical threat that we can face. And that's saying a lot. Here is a statement made by our former president, Reuven Rivlin, some years ago, where he said, "Victory in the battle between us means losing the war of existence. It's a greater threat than nuclear bombs or terrorism, greater than the enemies who seek our destruction. The threat of eternal division will always be the greatest threat of all." Again, now that we've seen what the scope of what an onslaught could be, to still stand by this statement is saying quite a bit. In the wake of our collective nightmare on October 7th, we saw lots of things in a new light, and all of a sudden there was this outpouring of love and support, and we were witness to a new kind of unity that was crossing all divides. But I'm sad to say, and why this talk that we're about to engage in is still so sadly relevant, is that erosion is already beginning to show, right? Time has passed, and gradually we're reminded problems that have plagued us have not disappeared. They're trickling back in, and they're threatening to send us back into our old self-destructive ways. So in the short time that we have, I want to address the big question, which is why? What is our problem? Why is it so hard for us to get along with each other? As advertised, I'm a Bible teacher, and so I believe the best place to start to explore this question is in the Bible. And in fact, what we find when we look at the very beginning of Tanakh is the very first family that we're presented with is a nuclear family, and it's nuclear in two respects. It's comprised of a father and a mother and two children. But it's also internally implosive, right? It's got these differences that are so overwhelming that of the two siblings on Earth, one of them ends up killing the other one. And these tropes of sibling tensions are repeated consistently throughout the book of Genesis, right? The opening book of the Bible, it is the most consistent theme. We start with Cain and Abel at the beginning. The other bookend of this book of Genesis, of course, is the story of Joseph and his brothers. And in between, we've got this smattering of other contentious brothers, Jacob and Esau, Yitzchak and Ishmael. So again, it gets us back to this question of why the Bible chooses to start its story of humanity in this way, with strife, and particularly with strife between siblings. So I'm going to explore a couple of avenues. One of them is to perhaps make the point that if we trace ourselves back far enough, we'll find out that we're all siblings. So let's just keep that in mind. But I think there's something a little darker going on here, which it's pointing to something that is primal about sibling tensions, that is even fundamental to the human condition, that is specifically this sibling relationship that is particularly fraught. This is the relationship to look out for. Okay, we're going to have to work a little bit now inside the text to get to explore that thought more fully. Let's begin here. And this is now, we're going to look at the text itself. And I want to do what Matt warned you I was about to do, which is the following. I want to ask you to take a look on your own at the first couple of lines in this text, in whichever of the two languages that I've offered is the most comfortable for you. I've got it in Hebrew on the top, English on the bottom. And I want you to look at the account in this text of the birth of the two sons, Cain and Abel, the choice of professions, and the bringing of the offering. Okay, so it's about 3 lines of this text, maybe 4 in the English, 4 or 5 in the English. And as you read this, I want to, first of all, ask you to do something that's very difficult. I know you've probably seen this many times. Just approach it as if it's clean. You haven't encountered it before. Give it a fresh look and ask yourselves, if I had to draw a character sketch of these two young men, Cain and Abel, how would I characterize Cain? How would I characterize Abel? Okay, just that. Couple of adjectives for each, and if you could put them in the Q&A, Matt, and I hope you'll be good enough to read out a few as they come in. So just take a minute. I'm going to keep quiet, take a look, read, and give your impressions.
Okay, so far I have Cain lost and resentful.
Okay.
You would think Cain is the gentler of the two brothers since he is a farmer and Abel slaughters sheep as part of his profession.
Yeah, that's
Um, Cain, problem with anger management.
definitely.
Uh, jealousy, keeper of earth and keeper of animals. Shepherd versus farmer. God was unfair and Cain resented it.
Yeah, let's take one more and then we're gonna look inside. Go ahead.
Okay, a couple more just popped
Go
up.
ahead.
Cain, uncontrollable anger. Cain wants favor with God. Um, farmers and the ranchers can't be friends. Cain, the initiator. So,
Hey, name the initiator. Okay,
yeah.
I want to start with that because I want to before we get to the part where he's all those things. He's a little different, I think, than our tendency, than the way that we tend to think about it. When we first meet him, let's look at it inside. I'm going to read it through with my running translation, but the real translation is just below. V'ha'adam yada et chava ishto, we have knowledge in the biblical sense. V'ata v'telet et Cain. She conceived and bore Cain. Okay, notice that that's a little unusual. She gave birth to Cain. Usually you would say, the text would say, she gave birth to a child and she named him Cain. There seems to be something Cain-esque about him from the moment he emerges into the world. What does the word Cain mean? She's going to explain. Vatomer, Kaniti ish et Hashem. I have, and this word kaniti is ambiguous. It can mean either I have acquired. It can also mean like koneh shamayim va'aretz. When God is called the koneh, it doesn't mean God has purchased the earth. It means God has created the earth. It could mean creator or acquirer. And I want to just think about those two attributes that perhaps we're going to see both of those in Cain going forward. He's going to be quite acquisitive. He's going to be competitive. He's going to be all those things that everybody noticed. He's also going to be creative. He's going to come up with an idea that no one has had before. Okay, so we've got these, I think, a little hint here that the mother perhaps sees in him or maybe even invests in him these qualities, but it's there right at birth. We won't get into the rest of this strange proclamation, but I want everybody to just take note of the fact that when Cain is born, there is a name that's given, a reason for the name. Okay, there's this little maternal proclamation. Look how Hevel's birth is recorded in contrast to that. Vatosef laledet et achiv et Havel. She continued to give birth to his brother Hevel. How'd you like to be the child in that birth announcement, right? It's almost like a yawn, ho hum, and yes, another one was born who is presented to the world in relation to the firstborn. He seems like this kind of Me Too kid, this afterthought. And notice also that there is no reason given for the name Hevel. He's just born Hevel. No explanation. There's something much less grand and ceremonious about this child. And although there is no reason given for the name, we readers of the Bible are very familiar with this term. This is not a neutral word in the Hebrew Bible. The word Hevel is a very popular word in the book of Ecclesiastes of Kohelet. Havel, havalim, hakol hevel. Everything is right, vanity, vaporousness, fleeting, insubstantial. It's almost as if, well, perhaps the text is communicating to the reader, there isn't much here, not much substance to this kid. Perhaps it's saying don't get too attached to him because he's not going to be around for very long. Maybe it's a little foreshadowing, but there's something that's conveyed in the name, both in the name and in the absence of any maternal explanation for the name. Something there is much less invested, it seems, in this child. And I think there's something true, something just natural about this. The firstborn, any firstborns out there know this. Parents invest lots of what they've got into that first one, for better or for worse, all their unfinished business. The second one is less attention, for better or for worse. Maybe that's what's going on here. Let's just leave that as an open question. Their choice of professions. Vayhi Hevel ro'et son, v'Kayin haya oved adama. Hevel is a shepherd and Cain is a worker of the earth. And you all noticed that. And I just want you to, here's how I picture it. Right, Cain is schwitzing over a cursed earth. And we have to remember this earth, we know a lot about it from the story of Adam and Eve. When they were banished from the Garden of Eden, the earth is given this curse where it's not going to produce. You have to sweat over it. And here Cain is firstborn. We can assume that he gets the first choice of professions. And he steps up. He's the responsible brother who says, I have dad's business is failing, but somebody's got to do it. And so he does this. Whereas Hevel, very interestingly, we might ask ourselves, what exactly do we need shepherds for at this stage in biblical history? Let's keep in mind that human beings are vegetarian until after the flood. They're not allowed to eat meat. So what if you have two able-bodied young men? You would think that perhaps both of them would do things that were essential for human survival. Cain certainly does. The question is, what exactly is Hevel doing? And I say this only with respect for liberal arts majors. I was one myself, but I picture him as a liberal arts major sitting under a tree reading a philosophy book while the sheep are grazing. Maybe he's knitting a sweater, maybe he's getting a little sheep milk. I don't know, but it seems that the hard work is not split evenly here, where Cain is really stepping up at the beginning. But then suddenly something changes, right? They step out of their expected roles. And here we have Cain having this idea that no one has ever had before of bringing an offering to God. Okay, here we'll start from the right side of the page. At the end of days, Cain brought from the fruit of the earth an offering to the Lord. Now that's a very wonderful thing to do. Who has ever had such an idea? There's initiative. Somebody said initiative, right? He steps up with this. But Hevel now, the Me Too kid, says, "Oh, me too. That's a great idea." The Hevel hevi gamhu. Notice that he too brought, and he brings an offering. Interestingly, he brings mi bechorot sono umichel vehen, from the first of this flock and from their fat. And several of you pointed out that God's behavior here in accepting Hevel's offering and that Cain seems terribly unfair. But I want to ask you to look for a second at this screen and note that maybe there is some justification, although I think there's no way that we can fully understand this. But there seems to be something about the way that the two offerings are presented that suggests that one is superior to the other. Cain brings fruit. Hevel brings the first of his flock and the fat. Right? It's almost as if, right, one gets two adjectives, positive adjectives, and one gets no adjectives. It's as if I would say something like, my son Akiva bought me a shiny, expensive necklace, and my daughter Nechama bought me earrings. Right? What I would be able to infer from that statement, somebody listening to that would infer that I am more impressed with the first than the second if I give two glowing adjectives about it. So perhaps there is something where Hevel, the son where there were very few, very low expectations, steps out of his expected role and outshines his brother. His brother, who had all the expectations on him, somehow falls short. He doesn't do his personal best. Has a great idea, doesn't follow through in an optimal way. I want to just pause for a second and ask you to think for a second, is Hevel completely blameless in this whole story? We know that Cain is going to take over as the villain, that's for sure, because he's the murderer. But I think there's a tiny little hint here. And here there's a rabbinic saying that you can't compare reading a piece of text 100 times to reading it 101 times. And I can attest to that because the 101st time I looked at this, I said, oh, look what he's bringing. Mi bechorot sono. That's not a neutral term in the book of Genesis. From the firstborn of his flock, right? All the sibling rivalry centers on this question of who's going to get the rights and the privileges of the firstborn. And here's the secondborn. Is he trying to communicate a hidden desire, perhaps, to usurp his brother's position of the firstborn? He's bringing a firstborn. I'm just saying it's possible. The reason I want to point out this possibility is to note that in this very first sampling in the book of Genesis of sibling rivalry, that rarely, if ever, is the rivalry a zero-sum game where one is completely full of blame and the other is completely blameless. It's usually a whole lot more complicated than that, and I will leave it at that. But let's go on. God is now going to deliver a speech that is basically impossible to understand. Actually, let's go back to this text. The last two lines, God appears to, Cain is furious, as you all noticed, and the text describes him as his face falling. And God appears to him and says, Halo im tetiv, if you do well. And here, this is one of the most difficult verses in the entire Bible. I'm going to try to simplify it by suggesting that I think God intends one thing and Cain hears something else entirely. What does God want Cain to hear? Halo im tetiv, if you will just do well, just improve your own act, step up, do your personal best. Se'et, your face has fallen. If you want to bring it back up again, just do better, right? Don't look around you. Don't worry about your brother. Don't engage in competition. If you have to be competitive with anybody, be competitive with yourself. You didn't do your best, just do better. And lo tetiv, we're going to skip that. But then God says, ve'elecha teshukato, the sin, these baser instincts of yours, their desire is to you, right? This dark, these demons that are in you are always there to follow you. But the atatim sholbo, you can rule over it. You can rule over your basic nature. It's up to you. You have the capability. Tim shol, you can rule. And I want to just take a moment to pause at that very significant word in the book of Bereshit. We've seen it twice before. The first, limshol means to rule. The first time we find it is when God creates the celestial bodies in the sky, the sun to light up the daytime and the moon to light up the night. Basically, God is communicating here before humanity is even created that the only creations that are supposed to have rulership are things that God creates that are, right, celestial. But human beings are not supposed to rule over other human beings. I think that what Cain hears is the precise opposite of what God wants him to hear, where God says, if you will, if halo im tetiv se'et, if you do well, se'et, he's thinking of this word uplift in a different context. Later in the book of Genesis, when Jacob blesses his children, he blesses his firstborn son Reuven with this word, yeter se'et, you have greater uplift, meaning you have power and authority and control. You are the ruler of your brothers, se'et. So what Cain is hearing is, I don't want to uplift myself. I want to have uplift over him. And when God says, Atatim shol bo, you should rule over it, over those dark forces and demons within you. What he's hearing is, Atatim shol bo, I want to rule over him. I want to win this struggle. This is competition. There's going to be only one winner here, and I've got to achieve that. And so even though God does something here that is very unusual, giving somebody a preemptive warning, right? I know you're angry. I know you're about to do something dramatic and irreversible. Don't do it. What Cain hears instead is, you're right, you should win, you should control, and you should strike. And so he lets his demons take over. And what we've got is the first murder. And the first murder is presented in a very unusual way, with a gaping hole in the text. Vayomer Cain el Hevel achiv, Cain said to Abel his brother, and then suddenly, Vayhi beyotam basadeh, they're in the field, Vayakom Cain el Hevel achiv, Vayahargehu. Cain arose over Abel, his brother, and killed him. Okay, so anybody who's reading this text carefully will note that the main information is absent. Cain said to Abel, his brother, comma, quote, but no text. What did he say? Suddenly they're in the field and he killed him. So everybody, all the commentators throughout all the centuries asked this question: what is the missing content of this conversation? And so here is a midrash rabbah, that offers us three possible scenarios. Each scenario is prefaced by a question. And I want you to keep in mind the question that the midrash continuously asks. What were they arguing about? That's the question. They said, scenario one, come, let us divide the world. One took the land and the other took the movable objects. One said, the land you are standing on is mine. The other said, oh yeah, well, what you're wearing is mine. One said, take it off. The other said, get off. As a result, Cain arose over Abel, his brother, and killed him. Okay, scenario number one, they're arguing about the land and the movable objects. Next, Midrash says again, what were they arguing about? One said, in my portion will the holy temple be built. The other said, no, in my portion will the holy temple be built. As a result, Cain arose over Abel, his brother, and killed him. Scenario number three, with apologies, this is disgusting. Rabbi Yehuda Bar said they were arguing about Chava. Okay, I did apologize. Basically, arithmetic, 4 human beings presented to us by the Bible, 3 of them are men. Who gets the mother? Okay, that's what they're arguing about. Okay, now I had the privilege when I first encountered these midrashim of learning them with my teacher of blessed memory, Nechama Leibovitz, and she posed the challenge. Basically, what are these midrashim trying to convey? This is the first murder recorded in the Bible. It's the first war, if you will. Basically, what the midrash is asking is, why do people do this? Why do we kill each other? Why do we do this throughout human history? And the midrash is offering 3 scenarios. The first, what do people fight and kill over? Land and stuff. Second scenario, the holy temple, religion. And the third, sex, right? Pick a war, any war. It usually boils down to one of these 3. Okay, so that's lovely. But Rashi is having none of it. Rashi says, yeah, I know, I read those midrashim too, but I reject them all. He said, what did he say? Cain said to Abel, he engaged in contentious words with him to create a pretext to kill him. And then he says, there are many midrashim on this, I know all about them, but this is the plain sense of the text. What is Rashi doing here? Rashi's looking at the question that the midrashim ask consistently, and he's saying, that's not the right question. What were they arguing about? Because what does the text say? Vayomer Cain el Hevel achiv. Only one brother is talking. Cain said to Hevel, his brother. And basically what Rashi's doing, he's saying that there is a fourth cause, which is essentially the cause that underlies all others, which is when human communication, when speech is absent, when people stop talking with one another and start talking at one another, when dialogue is replaced with monologue, when words are weaponized and used as pretext to strike, that's when the red flags come out, and that's when the danger zone comes. He's not having a conversation, and that is precisely the problem. Okay, so I want to take this as this is the first story that we looked at. I just want to give one shout out to one very important word that we're going to have to keep an eye on. The word ach, meaning brother, this 2-letter word, appears no fewer than 7 times in this short little passage about Cain and Abel, reminding us in the most redundant ways, right? Cain said to Abel, his brother. Cain arose over Abel, his brother, reminding us over and over again of the horrific nature that every murder is, in a sense, a form of fratricide. How terrible is this? But at the same time, I think it's sounding a warning to the reader to say, this is the relationship, the one between siblings, that we have got to keep an eye out. Okay, let's continue. We're going to now fast forward to the very end of the book of Bereshit. Matt, you mentioned the book that I wrote, How Biblical Stories Mine and Undermine Each Other. This is my favorite method of studying Bible, is to pose stories opposite each other and see how they build on each other, how they borrow each other's language and themes, and how we learn more about both by viewing them in light of one another. And I believe that there is much in common between the story of Cain and Abel and the story of Joseph and his brothers. First of all, Joseph, is he like Cain or is he like Abel? Well, I would say at the most basic level, we would think at first glance that he's more like Abel. Why is he more like Abel? He is the victim, right? He is the Hevel is the murder victim. Yosef is the almost murder victim. Both Joseph and Hevel are more loved. Joseph is going to be more loved by his father. Hevel is going to be preferred by God. Both of them are referred to as an additional child, which I find very intriguing. Remember, it said there, Vatosef laledet, Chava continued to give birth. That verb, lahosif, is the very verb for which Yosef is named. They're both added on. So they have, I think, the obvious things they have in common. But I think the less obvious is that he's got a little bit of Cain in him too. And that's the more intriguing part that I'd like to explore with you. I think, like Cain, we're going to find Joseph using his words not for communication, but for power, control, for competition, acquisition, and for ultimately in a very aggressive and even violent manner. Okay, so let's look out for this. We begin with Joseph being loved by the father, right? And now we're talking about a very large family, but that's not good enough for him. Vayave, here we're starting at the top of the page here. Vayave Yosef et dibatam ra'a el avihem. He brings evil reports, diba, which has within it the part of the root of lidaber, bringing, but with evil connotation. He brings slurs about his brothers to the father. He whispers in the father's ear all kinds of negative things about the brother, pressing the advantage that he already has by speaking ill of his brothers. Okay, we're going to get back to this. Let's just look at how he further misuses his speech. He starts having these dreams, and I can't even say they're thinly veiled because they're not veiled at all. These are dreams of grandeur where they're all about ruling over his brothers. And in fact, that is not lost on them. He makes sure to tell them, right? It's one thing to have these dreams, but he makes sure to say, listen, brothers, I've got to tell you every detail about these dreams where I'm ruling over all of you, right? Yes, maybe your sheaves of corn and maybe your stars, but it's obviously I'm talking about us, right? And the brothers get the message and they say to him in anger, Imashol timshol banu? Do you want to rule over us? There's that word again, limshol. They recognize it. You don't think that it's just for the sun and the moon and the stars to rule. You want to rule over us. And they hate him for his words, his dreams and his words, right? It's not just for the dreams, it's for talking about the dreams. And he makes sure again to tell them. And this time, look at the dream that he has. The second dream, he says, Vayomer hine chalamti chalom od, vihine hashemesh v'hayareach, the sun and the moon, v'achad asar kochavim mishtachavim li. The sun and the moon and 11 stars are bowing down to me. I just love this. If you're going to be grandiose, just do it all the way. Basically, the symbols of rulership, the sun and the moon, which God says puts them in the sky to say, you are the rulers. Joseph has a dream, which he makes sure to tell his brothers. I'm so big that the symbols of greatness themselves, of rulership, they're bowing down to me. I'm above them. This is the message that he makes sure to communicate in every possible way to his brothers. And I want to right, to speak it. And just to get back to the first line on the page, what is their reaction? Vayisneu oto, they hate him. But beyond that, v'lo yachlu dabiro l'shalom. They cannot speak a peaceful word to him. Basically, what they're saying is, this is what you're going to do with your speech. We are going to withhold our speech from you. Our conversation is over because it's never been a conversation. Cain was talking at his brother. Joseph is talking about his brothers. Brothers are not communicating with each other. And now as we saw in the Cain and Abel story, once we get into the situation, when the red flags start to fly, violence is almost inevitably the next step. And in fact, we find that the brothers come up with a plot to kill him. I won't get into all the details. I'm sure you know them. At the last minute, they sell him into slavery, and he's saved from being killed, not because they didn't try. So the question is there hope for these brothers? And I know that there's been a lot written and a lot said about the process that has to happen before these brothers can reconcile. But the emphasis on that process has always been, what do the brothers have to do? And again, like Cain, they are more to blame here because they're the ones who choose violence. So it's easy to see they're the culpable ones, and they're the ones who are going to have to do the work. But I find it more interesting to explore Joseph in this story, who is not blameless himself, and to see what kind of process does he have to go through. And to my mind, the way to explore that is to trace his progress. Once he's sold into slavery and he ends up in the house of Potiphar, his whole life has been turned upside down. And now he is at the mercy of others, right? This grandiose child no longer has any power. In fact, he's been bandied around about from hand to hand, traded. He's a commodity. And he ends up in this house. And what I want to suggest here is that the speaking, the power-driven use of speech, abuse of speech, is going to run wild here. And Joseph, rather than being the one that dishes it out, is on the receiving end. And I think there's a great psychological truth in this story, in that it's very hard for people to see their own errors, their own foibles. But if there's a chance of people really facing their own errors, it tends to come when they're on the receiving end of the same behavior that they've been doling out. They don't like how it feels, and then they begin maybe the process of empathizing with others and saying, that didn't feel good to me, it probably doesn't feel good to those people when I do it. I think that something like that is happening here, where all of a sudden he is the powerless one, and here is the wife of Potiphar, who is going to use speech in a very elaborate and very, very negative way, and is going to bring Joseph almost to the point of losing his life. Let's look at it. These two speaking words, daber, ledaber, and lemor, these two roots are, each one appears 7 times in this text. It's all about talking. It begins with, well, let's look at it. Batisa eshet Adonav et eineha el Yosef. His master's wife, okay, the text makes sure to put everything in the right perspective. She has the power. She's not named through this entire text. She is presented to us as the person who has all the power, master's wife. She raises her eyes to Joseph, Batomer. And the first power-driven speech is, she issues an order. And I know that this whole passage is often presented as a kind of seduction scene. I look at this and I see nothing but sexual harassment, pure and simple. This is a power differential. This is the one person with all the power is harassing a person with no power. She doesn't try to seduce him at all. She just orders him, Shichva imi, lie with me. And he refuses, and we can just imagine the position that he's in, where he understands that whatever he does, he is doomed. Right? If he succumbs, then his master could find out and kill him. And if he doesn't succumb, she will be furious and she'll probably kill him. But he chooses the more moral approach, and he refuses. And then notice here, Dabra el Yosef yom yom. She's talking at him every single day, the same thing. Lie with me, lie with me, lie with me. V'lo shama eleha lishkav etzla, and he absolutely refuses, despite these orders that she is ushering in every single day. When she realizes that she's not going to get anywhere with Joseph, she decides to, her attack escalates. She grabs him, and in a scene that is almost comical to imagine, somehow his garment unravels, he escapes, she's left there holding his garment. She rethinks her situation, and she comes up with a plan, which is to accuse him of attacking her. And so the first thing she does is to try to get her household staff to corroborate her story. So what does she do? Vatikra la'anshe beita vatomer. And notice I've just underlined all the talking words. They are everywhere. Vatomer lahem lemor. She said to them, saying. And this is very odd. The words that come out of her mouth. Re'u, see. Hevi lanu, he brought us. Who's he in this story? Who's she talking about? If somebody is about to report an attempted rape or a rape, you would think they would start with the perpetrator, he. But the he is not Joseph. Re'u hevi lanu, he brought to us Ish Ivri, a Hebrew man, litzachek banu, to mock us. This is ingenious. He, this unnamed he, she's talking about her husband. Basically, what she's trying to do is create a sense of solidarity with her household staff, which is absurd because we're talking about a very hierarchical society in ancient Egypt. But she's trying to gain allies when she is their mistress, right? The mistress of the house. How is she doing that? She's basically saying we're all in this together. We are all at the mercy of the big guy, right? The man. Ru'u Hevilanu, that unnamed man, I won't say his name, but we all know who I'm talking about. He did this to all of us. What did he do? He brought an Ish Ivri, interesting, the normal, what we would have expected her to call him, what he really is an Eved Ivri, he's a Hebrew slave. Okay, also quite clever on her part not to refer to him as a Hebrew slave, because if she's trying to create solidarity, she doesn't want these slaves to hear a complaint against a slave. Maybe they will feel solidarity with him. So instead of that, instead of playing the class card here, she decides to play the race card. What is he? He's a Hebrew man. He's just a threatening, dangerous other. He's an outsider who he, that master of ours, brought to mock all of us, right? It's them against us. We've got to band together. Okay, so she does this first, and that's her first, right? The first line of defense is to bring on, all done through the clever manipulation of words. Then her husband comes home, and now we've got another slew of speaking words. This time, and of course, there's much more to be said here. I'm streamlining it, but I want to just emphasize the speaking part of this text. Vatidaber elav kadivarim ha'ele lemor. She spoke to him like these words, saying, and this time she starts ba'elai. Now she is going to accuse Joseph because her husband is in front of her. But notice what she calls him now when she's talking to her husband. Now she can't play, right? She doesn't play the race card. Now she's playing the best card she's got with him is the class card. You're in my category here. You have to side with me. You can't side with a slave. Ba'elai ha'eved ha'ivri, right? And notice here now, what does he hear? Vayhi kishmoa adonav. Interesting that he's still referred to as Joseph's master. Is this a little hint that he feels bad about this and doesn't really believe this story? But what does he hear? Et divrei ishto asher dibra elav lemor, the words of his wife which she spoke to him, saying, kadivarim ha'ele, like these things or words your servant did to me, and he got angry. Is he angry? We don't know exactly what he's angry about. Some of the commentators think that perhaps he's really not angry at Joseph at all. He's angry that he is trapped in the situation where now he has to sacrifice the slave of whom he is especially fond, but he knows that he has no choice other than to side with his wife. Okay, basically what I'm trying to say with all of this is that this situation where Joseph falls prey to the abusive, manipulative, power-driven use of speech changes him. He sees things differently. He's humbled. And I think this prepares him, and again, I'm making a very long story short, but it prepares him in a significant way for the reconciliation scene with his brothers. They've gone through their process, but he had to go through his as well. And when we get to that scene, this is what we find. Vayoma, the big reveal, right? We've been waiting for 13 long chapters for this thing. The tension has been building. And finally, Vayomer Yosef el Echav, Joseph said to his brothers, Ani Yosef, right? Right? I'm not the king, the viceroy of Egypt. I'm your brother Joseph. And they're shocked into silence. This is a familiar place to be. Velo yachlu echav la'anototo. They were rendered speechless. They couldn't answer him. Ki nivhalu mipanav. They're terrified of him, right? This is the the equation that we have, the dynamic that we had at the beginning of their story, where he's got the power, and they don't talk to him, and they are put down by him. They're silenced. But this time we find a new language that Joseph is speaking. Vayomer. I just want you to notice here this word that I put in freakishly large letters. He calls himself a Moshel. And keep in mind that Joseph is now a ruler of the scale that even he, in his wildest, most grandiose dreams, couldn't have imagined. He is the ruler of all of Egypt. But look what he does with his power. He says to his brothers, Geshuna Eli, come close to me. Right? The first thing he does is, instead of pushing them off, he draws them close. And then he says to them, I don't blame you for anything, right? This is a language of peace and reconciliation. Lo atem shlachtem oti, but obviously they did send him there, but he says, no, you're not responsible. I don't hold you responsible. You didn't do it, God did. And God made me put me in this position of power. And God did this. What I understand from this position of power is not that I'm going to lord it over you and harm you, but v'chilkalti otcha, I'm going to sustain you. I'm going to provide for you. I'm going to take care of you. This is an entirely new relationship that he is offering them. And this is followed by one of the most emotional and baffling scenes in the entire story, where everybody's falling on each other's necks and crying. The emotion that's been held in is all come pouring out. And then he kissed all his brothers and cried on them. And afterwards, okay, here we end with one of the most strangest and most almost absurd anticlimaxes of all time. Va'acharechen dibru echav ito. Afterwards, his brothers talked to him in the middle of all this emotion. But I think if we look at this the way that we've been seeing it, that really at the heart of the problem is this absence of communication. Starting at the very beginning of the book of Bereshit, people, brothers, siblings, talking not with one another, but at one another or around and about one another. We finally have the speech that was withheld from Joseph at the beginning of the story, Lo yachlu dabro l'shalom. Now they say, you know what? This is a person we can talk to. We're going to restore that speech now. And it's not just dibru echav, but dibru echav ito. They didn't speak at him. They didn't speak around him, they spoke with him. What we have here, finally, after suffering through an entire book, is a two-directional conversation. Siblings are actually beginning a constructive conversation between them. And I want to just say that there's something here as we exit the book of Genesis that leaves us on a kind of hopeful note. This sense that it is possible with hard work, with a lot of suffering sometimes, but we can actually put this relationship back together and allow for something better. But I think, again, it also leaves us with this uneasy feeling that just from the sheer ubiquity of these tropes of sibling tension and sibling rivalry, that there's something about this that is going to plague us throughout our history. So, with your indulgence, I'm going to take the time that we have remaining to explore some thoughts of various thinkers and writers, and I will take the liberty of sprinkling a few thoughts of my own. Okay, so to preface this, I want to make it clear, as we all know, sibling relations can be our most wonderful relationships, most trusted, most comforting, cradle to grave, enriching, enduring, right? But together with the great gift, as these texts strongly suggest, there is something potentially innately explosive as well. Siblings are the people who are the closest to us. They know our deepest selves, our truest selves. They can see right through the layers that we have carefully constructed for ourselves over our lives. They can sometimes remind us of who we once were and maybe who we actually really still are. Sometimes we can feel a little threatened, a little unworthy. Here are a couple of comments from others. Rose Macaulay in the 20th century, we know one another's, talking about a book called The Siblings. We know one another's faults, virtues, catastrophes, mortifications, triumphs, rivalries, desires, and how long we can each hang by our hands to a bar. We have been banded together under pact codes and tribal laws. Here's another. Our siblings push buttons that cast us in roles we felt sure we had let go of long ago. The baby, the peacekeeper, the caretaker, the avoider. It doesn't seem to matter how much time has elapsed or how far we have traveled. Basically, what they're saying is sometimes our siblings can just be too close for comfort. But here's the sting, because paradoxically, we also often feel that our siblings, although they're this close, they're not quite close enough. And here's another statement, our siblings. They resemble us just enough to make all their differences confusing, right? Sometimes annoying, sometimes threatening, right? We can expect our siblings, because they're so close, we expect them to be not just close to us, but exactly like us, to share our values, our priorities, our choices, our opinions. And if they deviate just the slightest amount, we could feel outraged, even offended or betrayed. So that's the sibling conundrum, right? It seems impossible that they can annoy us and threaten us by being too close, and they can annoy us and threaten us by being not quite close enough. And I think if we look around the world today, we find that most conflicts in the world are actually extensions of this sibling conundrum. For example, on the world stage, most world conflicts are between people who are the closest to each other. They could share a border. Sometimes they live within the same borders. And sometimes they're so different, they're so similar rather, that an outsider couldn't tell the difference. I always think of this right in terms of a Venn diagram, and the conflict that comes to mind is this terrible slaughter of a million Tutsis by the Hutus in Rwanda in the 1990s. And in their Venn diagram, it's actually not quite this, it's different than this. They were like 90-some% the same. They all speak the same dialect of the Bantu language. People from the outside would think they were exactly the same, but for them, all they could see was that small area of difference between them, whether it's 5% or 10%. That is what, right? Although the difference is imperceptible to anyone else, that's all they could see, and it was enough to bring on the slaughter of up to 1 million people, right? You have to be exactly the same, or else you simply can't live side by side. If we're talking about us, Jews, wherever we are in the political sphere, we also feel kind of disproportionate outrage, even betrayal, if people are on the other side of the political divide. In the religious sphere, also this kind of absurd sense that we have that everybody should be in this precise, they should occupy this precise space that we do. If people are one centimeter to the right of me, they're a fanatic. 1 centimeter to the left, heretic, right? Here's the space, right? This one precise thing. That's acceptable. And it's the difference between truth and the betrayal of truth. Here in Israel, by the way, I really signed on to the former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett when he claimed that in our Venn diagram, despite all the negative noise out there, it's the extremes, and I think this is true in many places. They're making all the noise. He felt that 70% of Israelis agree with 70% on 70% of the issues. And I think if we would focus more on that 70% than on the 30%, we'd all be a lot better off. I want to give you a personal illustration of what I'm trying to say here. And I feel like, we've spent some time together, so I can confess this to you. Here is what I like to call the El Al test, which I have personally taken and failed at least 5 times. Okay, I am a frequent traveler. I use the national carrier El Al. And usually what happens is I wait in a line that is for a security check. And there is a earnest young person there, security person, who comes to ask me a lot of questions. And usually, often, standing a few paces behind me, next in line, is a gentleman who looks something like this person, in full Hasidic garb. And following scenarios happened to me at least 5 times, where the security person looks at me, right? Person of a certain age with a certain shmatan, a certain head, and coming from the land of the Jews, looks at this guy, looks at us both, and says, Atem biyachad, are you together? And I'm thinking, has she lost her mind? Do I look anything at all like this man? And then I kind of get control of myself and I say, yeah, she's looking at us and she's probably saying, yeah, they look exactly the same. People of a certain age with the shmata on the head, coming from the land of the Jews, the whole Jewish look, right? So and I don't know, but the two of us were thinking we have absolutely nothing in common. I don't know who says it faster or more emphatically, him or me, but we both go, no way are we together? No. Okay, my challenge, and I take it on right here and now. Next time it happens, and I'm certain it will happen again, when she asks, Atem biyachad, I'm going to take a deep breath and I'm going to say, in a deep, true, profound way, we are in fact biyachad. We are together. Now, I don't know how this guy's going to react. That's his work to do, but that's on me. In any case, I think that is basically our challenge, the biyachad challenge, to be able to look at the Venn diagram, see it the way that others see it, perhaps get some perspective and understand it. Here, this is on the well-known law, v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, love the other, love your neighbor as yourself. There is a great thinker in the 20th century, philosopher Rabbi Yehuda Leon Ashkenazi, who was one of the leaders of French Jewry after World War II. And on this passage, on this statement, he says that the way you have to read this is love your neighbor, v'ahavta l'reacha shehu kamocha. Love the other, love your fellow, who is most like you. That's the one that's the hardest to love. It's easy to love humanity at large, especially if they're over there. It's the people who are right here, who are almost you, but not you. Those are the ones that you have to look out for. It's your siblings, right? And if you look at our history, the easy part are the clear-cut wars against an external enemy, where we can cheer for our side and boo for their side and right, celebrate our great victory. But much more complicated are the wars when they're internal, with the people who are like us, but not precisely us. And my friend who's a professor of Jewish history, I was very upset one day when he showed me the book of Maccabees, where it says that the Maccabees were forcibly circumcising the Hellenized Jews, right, for their own good, of course. But this was going on constantly. And I want to say in our current situation that really sadly, as our political and religious gaps are widening, the possibilities for communication among us are shrinking. And here, getting back to the talking at and talking about, we are increasingly kind of siloing ourselves into our little spaces, our separate spaces, our little echo chambers. And we're talking about each other, but we're talking about the people who aren't allowed in, right? We let in only those people who believe and speak exactly as we do, right? Filter everybody else out, and we're talking about them. In addition, I think we're talking at each other, right? The screaming, this is new to us, right? This shouting down people, don't even let them get the words out if they say things that you don't agree with. Right? This is our culture of talking about and talking at. And I just want to, if it's not gloomy enough, I think maybe even most troubling of all is that basic assumption that we are actually siblings, that we are achim, right? That message that the Bible wants to convey at the very outset by repeating that word again and again. That assumption is not shared any longer by everyone. We can't take that as a given. I've spoken to people in certain communities where they've said that's our problem. I had a young conservative rabbi tell me this very recently, that it is not a given in his community that people see themselves as siblings with Jews throughout the world or in Israel. I hear this from Hillel directors, from the younger generation. It's something that we have to make the case, and we need to step up and do that. But the challenge is certainly out there. So basically, where does all this leave us? Can we live together in peace? Can we live together as family? If so, how can we? Well, tragically, October 7th showed us that we can do it. We reached truly remarkable levels of mutual responsibility, love, and concern. The outpouring was overwhelming. The words on everybody's lips, what can I do? How can I help? Right? Our minds, our brains, our personal sensitivities, our agendas, all of that took a rest, and our hearts and our kishkas took over. But going forward, this can't be our plan. We can't rely on tragedy to keep us together. Our very real problems are resurfacing. We don't have a strategy for addressing them in a constructive way. In Israel, there are life and death issues things that matter. Who's going to be drafted is coming up now, right? There's an urgent need for more soldiers. I can tell you personally, one of my children are all serving. My youngest son is now doing his third round of reserve duty since October 7th. He's in Gaza right now, right? Are the same people going to keep on serving, or is there going to be a more even split? That's coming attractions. I know in the United States, you've got an election coming up. There's going to be a lot of division over that. I imagine tensions between Israel and the diaspora are starting to resurface. Right? Is there hope here? Well, spoiler alert, in a 1-hour presentation, I'm not going to offer you the answer, but I can offer you 2 aspirational thoughts, which are culled from the stories that we have just read in the book of Genesis. First of all, we need to push hard against the culture of talking about and talking at each other. And here's a suggestion to replace it with our own very ancient culture of machloket. We invented this, and we are very, very good at it. Right? A Jewish book looks like this, an ancient Jewish text where you can have 2 lines of primary text and 100 lines of respectful but very impassioned debate about a point. We know how to say we disagree, but to do it with respect. And with it and opposite one another, actually looking at each other in the eye and doing it, or on a page, right? And I would also say that these texts have told us that we need to hold on to that insistent little word, that word of ach, of siblinghood, to remember that at the core of everything, we are in fact brothers, we are in fact sisters. That is a connection that is meant to be and needs to be and should be, and I hope will always be visceral. It's not negotiable, it's not reversible. And here I want to leave you with this nice picture, right? We're never going to stop disagreeing with one another. We're never going to stop being irritated by one another. And it's okay. It really is, right? It happens in the best of families, right? As long as we remember what we've recently learned in such a tragic and painful way, that we are and must do everything possible to remain biyachad, together. I'm finished. I'm happy to receive questions, which I invite you to write in the Q&A. And Matt, I invite you to present them to me. Can we get people on the screen now? What do we do? Should I stop the
Yeah, you can go ahead and stop your share, and there'll be so any of you out there who have questions, feel free. You can write them in the Q&A, and then I'll read some of the questions that we're able to get to. So some of the questions that I'm seeing are both related to what you spoke about most recently, but also going back to some of the texts themselves. Someone noted that desire and rule wording is almost identical to Eve getting cursed after eating the fruit. What do you make of that?
Great question. Yes. So I'm glad you noticed that. It's almost identical to what God says to Eve. To your husband is your desire, and he will rule over you. And that has been, in my view, misunderstood to be a mandate, when in fact, I think it's God communicating in the context of all of God's ideal creation breaking down. All relationships are now going to be what they were not meant to be. Between man and the earth, that relationship is broken. Between humanity and the animal world, right? Going to step on the serpent. Between women and right, there's going to be tension when women give birth, and there's going to be tension between man and woman, where throughout much of history he is going to rule over her, but he is not supposed to. That is a sign of something being terribly broken. And I get back to that original use of the word moshel, which is implied in that the use of that word is people are not supposed to rule over each other. Only those things in the sky are supposed to rule over us. I think this is God saying everything's broken now, but it's a challenge and a charge to humanity to try to overcome it. Just like we wouldn't say, man, God says to the man, by the sweat of your brow, you're going to get bread. And nobody would say that if a man gets a computer job, that he is violating God's command, right? We all understand that to mean it's going to look this way for a long time, but you should try to do, get overcome it. And I think that is equally true of what God says too. That's my take on it. I hope that
Thank
helps.
you. Yes, thank you. The question here, what is the implication of the Tower of Babel story to communication?
Well, that's, what is the implication? I think there are many implications. That is a talk for another time. In my book, it is in chapter 2. I would just give you a little teaser. I said, I noted that what my favorite method is to pair stories together, stories that I believe are in conversation with each other because they borrow each other's language and themes. The story that I paired with the Tower of Babel is the story of the enslavement in Egypt and the story of the midwives. And they share a remarkable number of very rare terms like hava and pen, come let us, lest, chomer levenim, mortar and bricks. These are terms that are used in only those two stories. And I believe that both stories have to do with erasing the sense of the individual, of creating not unity, but uniformity, where people stop thinking for themselves. And that is the opposite of what God wants human beings to do. That's the short version. You have to read chapter 2. Or
Great.
invite me back. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And we can put we also send a follow-up email to everyone, and we can put your book in that follow-up, so they can read about it there. There's a question here regarding fighting over Habe. Somebody asked, or is it eternal sibling rivalry issue? Who did mom love best?
Is that what the Midrash meant, you mean?
Yeah, that's what.
You want to try to make it a little prettier. It's not
Yeah.
so. I don't think that's what the Midrash means, but hey, let's hold on to that. Sure. Yeah. I don't think that's what it means. I honestly think it's trying to come up with kind of prototypes of what people fight about. And I think that more likely than rivalry for a parent's attention is that they're talking about, sexual matters of all sorts. But that is a nice attempt to clean it up.
Yes. Question, when you find that others do not see you as family, how do you find strength and or where do you find motivation to keep believing this tenet?
That we need to be family, but the other does not see us that way. Yeah, that is the toughest question I have been asked. I don't have an answer for it. I mean, my larger answer to that question, as my answer to any question about how do we get others to do things, is that we can't. We can only get ourselves to do things. And so the question is, what can we do? And I think the best we can do is keep things clear in our own mind. I think personally, what I would do is continually thinking about that person as a difficult family member. And just like I would say about that difficult family member, cutting off ties is not an option. I know in some families they do that. I think that's, that is a very harsh thing, and it pains me to think about it. I know that I would do everything in my power to make that not happen. So then the question would be, what can I do that will keep this going no matter what? And I think that there are strategies. I know personally I have some, there are some difficult family members way out there, and there are things to avoid talking about and things to talk about in a certain way. To try to create situations that can pull near rather than push away. But I am not claiming that is an easy ask at all.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely a difficult situation, difficult to answer. Yeah. What do you make of Ishmael and Yitzhak coming together to bury Abraham? Did they heal their relationship? This is probably another one from your book, I assume.
I made passing reference. I didn't not specifically, but yeah, I think there is something beautiful in that ending to the story, that they come together at their father's death. I think there's something very human and true about it, that it's mourning that can do that. And that maybe relates to the previous question, sometimes to think about things in those terms. What unites us is that we love the same people. When we lose a person, I think that almost naturally brings people together. I think again, October 7th, we lost so many people in that tragedy. There's something about that gives us a boost. It's terrible that that's what it takes. But yeah, I think that's a good example of how it's possible.
Yeah, it's a really relevant point, especially about October 7th. I feel like, the things that bring you together, even though they're some of the more, traumatic and tragic ones, definitely.
And how suddenly all those differences start shrinking. Like they don't matter as much because all you're seeing is your family member in need. And I think that's true in families, right? You see somebody and they're vulnerable and they are, their arms are out for help and you help. You just do it. You stop, you turn off all the noise and you just do what you need to do. I always think of the story of Abraham and Lot, his nephew, where they split because they can't get along with each other. And then, and this really has serious October 7th resonance for me, what does Abraham hear? That his nephew Lot, who was called his brother, he heard that he was taken captive. Okay, now in Israel today, that is the issue. And that's what happened here. We heard that our brothers were taken captive and everybody, despite all the splits, everybody came rushing back. And there was something just visceral about it.
Yeah, somebody noted here that there's a midrash that Isaac asked Hagar to rejoin the family after Sarah's death. Yeah. Have any thoughts on that? Yeah.
It's nice. It's nice. It's a whole reunion story. I think it's beautiful. Yeah.
Um,
We are hopeful always.
yeah, definitely. Are there other voices like yours who could speak to a theology of cooperation, respect, and understanding?
Sure. You want me to name names?
We can also follow up with it if names come.
Yeah, no, my understanding from that question that those voices are not being heard, that saddens me to think that that's happening. Yes, I mean, here in Israel, we certainly hear them in Hebrew. Unfortunately, we have people who speak much too much and publicly, and they shouldn't be talking at all. And again, I want to put that in perspective. It's a small minority, and it's a toxic minority. And I think the people who know better need to speak clearly and loudly. That is not us.
Yeah. There's several other comments that have come in about how difficult it is to reconcile and throughout all traditions. So and how hope can be difficult at times. So I don't know if you have any, if you have any final thoughts that you want to leave us with that are, positive final thoughts of hope and or whatever you feel is best.
Yeah, I want to leave you with the thought that we know how to do it. We proved that we know how to do it. And so we need to harness that and go forward and take the tragedy element out of it, to learn what the elements are of it, and to be deliberate and mindful about building a society, not just in Israel, but both sides of the ocean among ourselves. To be able to get back to that perspective and our Venn diagram to say, look how much we have in common. Look how much of a family we actually are. To try to highlight that and put the other stuff, to let it recede a little bit. Give up a little and gain a lot. And this has to be priority number one.
Yes, I agree. It's a beautiful point to end on, and it's really thank you for sharing these texts and these really truly meaningful lessons that have been brought out of these texts. So I appreciate them, and I'm sure our audience out there also does so. Thank
Okay.
you.
It's been a great pleasure.